Welcome to the Fiscal Fortress. Michelle.meiming, a distinguished lawyer, and Eric.chung, a veteran hedge fund manager, deliver insightful commentary on finance and the law and actionable advice. The Fiscal Fortress, where wealth meets wisdom.
Hey, Michelle, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Eric?
Yeah, doing well. It's Friday. A lot happening, personally, but also as it applies to this episode, a lot happening in the world. I'm really, really concerned, continue to be concerned about the events happening in Southern California. We're here in Northern California, and it wasn't that long ago that, Paradise burned down and Santa Rosa, and I remember just, horrific stuff. Last year, Healdsburg, and this week, the fires continue to rage in Los Angeles, and there are new fires. Thankfully, Palisades is largely contained, and the Altadena fire, but I read that there's multiple new fires, so kind of worried about that.
That is true. That is actually a very sobering event on the news. There's, wildfires. Living in California is not an uncommon thing, but this is the one that's going on currently is going to be likely the costliest in the history of the U.S., unfortunately.
It's just so saddening. And we've had some really bad disasters, earthquakes and obviously floods and stuff like that. I heard and I read that one of the reasons is because, unlike other disasters, this one hit an extremely wealthy area. So just the assets involved that burned down and artwork and stuff like that, and the architecture, the cost to replace all that, it's sky high.
Mm-hmm. That is true. It's very densely populated, the areas that are being affected, and so it's affecting a lot of families, and there's certainly the ones that are the celebrities but there's also, I hear and read about the ones that are just even, local churches and all the people that are there in terms of, the support network. They're just working class folks, and they lost their homes and their churches. So it is absolutely devastating.
Yeah. Homes, churches, schools, businesses, just complete desolation. I think at this point, north of 15,000 structures, and the majority of them were homes, were lost. I'm confident they will rebuild, but the impact to that community is really devastating.
Right, and then in terms of the health concerns, right, all this debris and toxic stuff in the air, and how unsafe it is to go back to these places.
Yeah, incredibly saddening and upsetting. One of the things that we're starting to see, or I'm starting to read about, is legal issues like liability, and you hate to see this, right? Where a terrible thing happens and immediately people resort to blaming instead of helping. But that's the reality. There is a lot of finger pointing at this point, and justifiably, people who lost their homes or their businesses, need to know who's accountable and who is responsible financially. Do you have any thoughts on that issue and legal liability in particular?
Sure. There's different kinds of liability. So at this point, it's still unclear how the fire started, but there is speculation that it is related to some power lines that were not being maintained. And so if it's a city government responsibility to maintain those power lines, then the city would be responsible. If it was a utility company, then the utility company would be responsible. And sometimes there's different kinds of responsibility. If it is a government or a utility, there's something called a strict liability. The fact that the disaster happened is enough that they're responsible. Don't need to prove it. You have to prove that they are responsible, but don't need to prove the impact that it had to the victim. But in terms of other kinds of liability, without getting too technical, there's also an intentional If there was arson, somebody who intentionally started the fire, then they would be liable if that could be proven, which can be difficult. And then there's also negligence. But on this scale, it's really hard to imagine that one person left something and then it's likely to be something a little bit more than just one person's negligence. But generally for fire, there is either an intentional liability, a negligent a source of liability, or just strict liability.
As you said before, like we really don't know. So candidly, we're engaging a little bit of speculation here. But if the experience in the past, and especially in Northern California, is any indication, there have historically been a lot of instances where the winds have knocked down power lines, and then that creates sparks, and with these super dry the vegetation being super dry, like it seems very conceivable just with the number of times that down power lines have contributed or caused fires that could be the cause of at least one of these fires. If that's the case, this is a really big deal, because these utilities and the state and the city, they have limited resources. And in Northern California, PG&E, which was the established cause of some fires here, they ended up going bankrupt as a result of some of these fires. So this is a big deal.
It is certainly a big deal, because for instance, if there's some celebrities who have, along with 20 other I read this morning, are suing the city of Los Angeles for the fire hydrants not having enough water, and then the reservoirs being, too dry. I mean, so there's a lot going on. Either the city is responsible, whether it is the state, if they didn't maintain their part in keeping the water available. So it is a big deal, because, Governor Newsom was more popular before, and now he's just really struggling. There's a lot of anger right now towards him.
There's a lot of anger. And, our podcast is not a political podcast. We don't get into these sorts of things. But it is, this is top of mind for a lot of people. There's a lot of, obviously Trump was elected, and he's very vocally taken some very unpopular positions, at least in California. One of the things that he said in his inauguration speech was that he's going to prioritize merit over other, things such as DEI and other cultural and social justice issues. And I'm reading similar sentiments in Los Angeles, which is a very, very Democratic blue state. And the way it's coming up is that people feel that, the number one job of the city, the mayor of the city, the governor of the state, the fire department is public safety and keeping people safe. And these basic things, whether it's crime, fire, police, and rightfully or wrongfully, there's a perception that the leaders have taken their eye off the ball and they're focusing on things other than the things that matter the most, or their mandate, their clear mandate. So I don't know if you have a thought or an opinion on that.
Well, I also read that that Trump was very, he's not supportive or sympathetic to what's, as in terms of the level of responsibility. He is saying that, the state did not do what it was supposed to do, and that he is threatening to, just withhold FEMA from them, or just make it a lot harder for them to access these funds if they don't try to do a better job before it gets to the FEMA level. Right. So it is definitely a lot of finger pointing in terms of trying to figure out who's responsible, but the federal government is not feeling like it is that it is their responsibility because the state level didn't do their job.
One of the other things, we're talking about, statewide, citywide, national responsibility and legal issues. I think from a very practical perspective, individuals have other, legal issues that they probably need to worry about, and that you would be uniquely qualified to talk about. And in particular, in a lot of cases, people lost everything in their homes, their artwork, obviously their vehicles, and also probably like wills and trusts and legal documents. I'd like to turn the discussion to that. For people who lost everything, including their legal documents, what should these people be doing at this time?
Well, that's an interesting point that you raised, because I remember when I was watching the news, I heard that some people went back into their house to try to get their birth certificate and other legal documents like their marriage certificate, things that they needed, and passports. But in reality, these are public. The birth certificate, death certificates, marriage certificates, those are all public documents that can be purchased. And so for even passports, you can reapply. It really is not worth risking a life to go back into a burning area or an area that's been forced to evacuate. There are certain government documents that can be reproduced. So not to worry about that. And then even in terms of a will and a trust, if the client, if the person who lost their home had seen a lawyer, and the lawyer kept an electronic copy in their system, and it's backed up to the cloud, then that is already sufficient proof that the will and trust existed. It's not necessary to have the absolute original with the ink signature. So that's why there is some misconception about that there's the actual original is not necessary, especially if you went to a lawyer. If a person wrote a will with their own handwriting or created a trust on their own, then likely it wouldn't have been kept by any other person. And so that runs the risk of being lost.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who wrote their own will, there's nothing they can do about it at this point. That document's probably lost, and this would probably be a good time for them to consult with an attorney and do it the right way.
Mm-hmm. That is true. It is better to just have another person who has a copy of this document and has saved it to a cloud. Like any attorney should have a iCloud or a cloud backup of their files, so that way the client doesn't have the burden of holding the only copy. Another one of the things that has come up while this issue of fires, even though Northern California doesn't have the current fire, there's a lot of that type of worry on people's minds where we live. And so one of the issues that comes up is the cost of insurance for the house and whether or not one can even purchase the insurance. So recently, insurance premiums have been going up incredibly high. And so it's even sometimes the insurance company won't even insure the house. And so one of the things in terms of estate planning, it becomes relevant is to make sure that if you did transfer your house into the name of your trust, that the insurance policy is purchased in the name of the trust. Otherwise, it risks the insurance company denying the claim because it only insured the individual and did not insure the trust holding onto the house.
That's such a good issue. I would have never thought about that, actually. So they should call their insurance broker immediately and just get the name transferred. And there should be, I'm assuming, no cost for that, right? Because that's just a formality.
Correct. Yes, it's very nominal, if at all. So for sure, if you know, for anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you know that you've created a trust and you do have homeowners insurance, then to make sure that that the insurance policy is purchased in the name of the trust to avoid a claim denial.
Are there any other things that individuals should review or update in their estate plans as a result of, just now that disasters and things like this are top of mind for people?
Sure, I would say as much as possible, have anything that's important to your family, have it stored in the cloud. If it's a document that can be stored and uploaded to the cloud, photographs, for instance, legal paperwork. And then in terms of physical items around the house, if it's valuable, to have a picture of it. If you've purchased insurance on it, to make sure you have a picture. So things like that, to be proactive.
That's a really good point. And these days everybody obviously has a mobile phone, and on your phone you can easily get you could either just take a picture, but they have scanning apps that make it really simple. So it wasn't like the old days where it was a pain. These days you just have to set aside maybe an hour, get all your physical documents out, use your phone to either take pictures or scan them, and it'll seamlessly upload to the cloud. It's a little bit of work, but it's not something that people should be intimidated by. Switching gears a little bit, as an attorney, are there any other kind of legal issues or challenges like property disputes or insurance claims or environmental concerns, anything like that that you think people should know about?
Well, I heard about scams taking place in terms of, because of the wildfires, there's a lot of people who are actually trying to approach the homeowners and either get them to sell the house that is burned down. And so they're trying to take advantage of a situation where people are vulnerable and could be in a position to really need money, and then to just hand over ownership by signing a deed. Anytime anybody is asking you to act on an urgent basis, likely there's something up their sleeve.
I read actually that I think there was a governor's order that made that illegal. Like you couldn't give somebody, make an unsolicited offer for somebody's property within a certain period of time because of this very issue, because people are obviously distraught and they may need money and they're very susceptible to selling their property at an undervalued price. So this is very concerning.
That is true. I read about something like that too, where there's also new laws being, there's existing laws from before, but then also new laws that are being passed to prevent people from taking advantage of another person's misfortune. So it is got to be very careful. There's a lot of people, sadly, who are trying to take advantage of the situation and going through even whatever is unburned from these places to see if there's any valuables.
Oh my God. Are there any resources that are available to individuals and families, especially legal assistance to help people?
They should check with the local bar association. I know a lot of attorneys are trying to help as well in their communities, and so look in your local bar association if you are in Southern California, and see what is being offered in terms of, I think probably the legal part is not as immediate as just the basic parts, which is just having a place that's warm to live in and food to eat. But if you are worried about the legal part, I know a lot of bar associations are willing to volunteer to help victims.
Yeah, it's incredibly distressing. I also wonder, switching gears a little bit, I think long and hard about the long-term consequences and the long-term implications of disasters like this. I also think a lot about how policymakers could make better decisions going forward. One of the things that I read is that these fires, specifically in the Palisades, there have been numerous fires in that area, and it seems like we're just making the same mistakes over and over and over again. What are your thoughts on kind of the long-term implications of the fires and any policies and decisions that we should make differently in the future?
Well, I do worry that if the cities are being sued, like City of Los Angeles is being sued, that it could bankrupt them, because this is, as I mentioned, is probably the costliest fire in the history of the United States. And so whoever is going to be culpable for this, who's going to be liable for this, is going to have a really hard time. Even PG&E in Northern California, they had hundreds of billions of dollars of liability, and that caused them to go into almost, they had to file for bankruptcy, and I think they're okay now, but it does threaten the existence of that city. And so from a larger perspective, we got to wonder if the city will declare bankruptcy, if they are responsible for the lack of maintenance and for not taking safety seriously enough. And then what happens when the city is bankrupt? How does the state come in to provide the services that the city is no longer going to do, because it ceased to exist?
Where my mind goes as a financial guy is, if that were to happen, how would that impact pensioners? So I'm thinking like the LA firefighters and police department and teachers, and I guess maybe the teachers might be, there's like a California pension, but I just wonder whether the state is funding programs for city employees, if the city goes bankrupt, that I imagine that can't be a good thing for those employees.
Mm-hmm. It would be a big problem. It would have to definitely be tied up in court. Assets would be frozen, and we're talking with the employees' funds and pension funds, we're talking billions of dollars that would be frozen until the outcome is released in terms of who gets priority in that situation and who gets money and who is out of luck.
One of the things that I think about a lot, because I, as an undergraduate, majored in economics. There's a thing in economics called the tragedy of the commons, where, without getting too wonky, but basically, like, we don't, as a society, there are costs to our actions that we all share, but we really don't actually pay the cost. So in the case of, building in fire-prone places or disaster-prone places, the market value of our homes don't really reflect, the actual cost of society of building there. In terms of like fossil fuels, like driving cars, we pay for the car and the gas, but we're not really paying for the price of climate change, and these what they call externalities. This is probably a wake-up call, because at the end of the day, when stuff happens, and it's inevitable, right? These acts of God, these costs are real. As you pointed out earlier, I mean, somebody's going to pay. If it's not the individuals, then it's probably the government. And what that means is that we all end up paying as citizens of California or the United States, one day maybe the world. It's actually a really sobering thought, and something that I think policymakers should focus more on.
Sadly, yes. I think there's also the cost of health of these firefighters who are battling these blazes, and what they're taking in terms of the toxic fumes and things, even if they have the protective gear. And also for people who live in neighboring areas, even if they weren't directly impacted by the fire, they're still breathing in these particles in the air. So there's a health cost.
Health costs, and people are also saying, like, the smoke and just the environmental impact of this is massive, right? Eclipsing a lot of the climate change initiatives and attempts to reduce carbon in the atmosphere. These fires, obviously are huge setbacks. Obviously, our hearts go out to everybody in Southern California, and this is probably a good place to park it. I really, really hope that people are doing okay. If there's anything that we could do, or if there's any topic that we could cover that would be helpful to you, would encourage people to post a comment, and we'll definitely respond. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks for listening. And if something that I mentioned you want to get more clarification on, such as the making sure that if you own property insurance over your home, and you have a trust, whether to what question exactly to ask to your insurance company, then please do reach out to me, and I'll make sure that it's clear that the trust should be the owner of the policy.
Thanks very much for watching. Take care, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye for now.